As far as muting is concerned, I propose to mute everybody, but you can unmute yourselves. Now, the way that David would like to run this is that he will pause at points to ask if anybody has any questions or comments. So feel free to unmute yourself if you wish to. We've always got the chat box at the bottom as well, and the usual thing is if people have a question and they put it into the chat box, we've got people like Simon, Arthur, Tony, all sorts of people here who are likely to be able to answer the questions and probably will do so. But if you wanted to save your question and actually ask David, direct, then that's the point at the relevant points if you want to unmute yourself and do that. So we've had a little bit of a test that David's had some problems with because he's such a long way away with some latency. But we've had a test this morning and we don't think that's going to be a problem today. So when he's used his cursor on the presentation, he was having a 4-second delay with the previous presentation that he did, but we don't seem to have that problem today. I think that's about it. So I don't know if there's anything. I'll hand over to David now and I'll mute everybody except David. So if you just let me mute everybody, then unmute you, David. Okay, so right, we should be there now. So if I hand over to David now.
Okay, well, yeah, let me just say that if during the presentation, I'll put a screen up in a minute, if I waggle the mouse at something and it appears to be in completely the wrong place, there are two possible explanations. One is there's a big delay and it'll get there by the time I'm talking about something completely different, so it'll still be in the wrong place, or I'm just completely confused and I'm pointing at the wrong thing anyway. Could well be either. Okay, let me pop this shared screen up. So I hope you can now see the initial slide, and what I'm going to be talking today about is what is a change. We'll do some exploring about this. I want to start with a question, and if I click there with any luck, here we go, yes. So one of the things that the English style of ringing is sometimes called is indeed change ringing. English ringing does differ from what happens in most of the rest of the world. Lots and lots of cultures have invented bells or gongs or things to make a lot of noise, and you have to hit the bell with something to make it sound, obviously. The sensible thing to do is you've got a bell that can weigh several tons and a clapper that's much smaller. Any normal, sensible person, presumably, would pick up the clapper or some donging device and hit the bell with it. I've always felt it would only take the English to feel that the more sensible thing is to move the bell to hit the clapper. It really is a rather weird way of doing things, but it's what we do. So I think I'll refer to you lot as you English for these purposes. It really is rather peculiar. The style of ringing that we do is called full circle ringing or change ringing. So let's just see how it works getting other people to say something. So I might ask, why do we call it full circle ringing? That's a fairly easy question. Someone's got to unmute and say something. Why do we call our ringing style full circle ringing?
Yeah, are people struggling to unmute?
I just presumed
Linda,
it was because we stood in a circle.
Ah, there's a good answer. I don't think it's the right one, but it's an interesting one. We always learn interesting things. Linda.
The bell goes round in a complete circle. But it's chain.
That's the less interesting, but I think probably the correct answer. Let's do a bit of physics here. If you hang the bell on a wheel and then just by pulling a rope let it swing a little bit, it's elementary physics that the period of the swing is largely independent of the degree to which it swings. That means you've got no control over the timing. And that indeed is what happens in European ringing by and large. You have a lot of bells, you swing them, but you've got no control over when they strike, so they all just go bing, bong, 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 all over the place. And as a result, to make it sound nice, the bells are tuned to thirds and fifths and nice sounding chords, so that even if they're all ringing all over the place, it works fine. However, with English ringing, we do ring the bell right round for a full circle, because as the bell gets near the top, as you know from when you started learning to ring, that's when we can insert a pause. So we do have some control over when the bell rings. So we can ring, for example, rounds. Because we've got control over the timing, we can make the bells sound nice and rhythmically in rounds, and that's fine. And that sort of started becoming popular, or what would it be, about 400 years ago, with the invention of the stay. The stay has two purposes. One is a sort of fuse, a safety device. So if the bell does get out of control and has got too much energy, it's a safety device, meaning that the bell doesn't get damaged. It just goes around an extra circle. Might damage us if we forget to let go, but it's designed to protect the bell, not us. But the other great benefit of it is it means we can actually finish ringing, put the bell up and just beyond the balance, and the stay and the slider will hold it there. So we can ring this style of ringing and not have to be forever ringing the bell back down and back up again each time. So that means we can ring rounds. What about change ringing? What do we mean when we talk about change ringing? What's a change? Any volunteers on that one? Okay, I think I'll answer my own question. A change effectively means that after a bit we're going to get bored just ringing rounds. Let me turn the screen back on again. Here we go. We can change what we're ringing. So if we get tired of ringing rounds, we can change to some other sort of ring in a different sequence. And indeed, the very first example of that we usually come across is actually calling a change. We have this thing called call changes that I'm sure you've all rung. And in call changes, the conductor says what change is wanted. We're going to change from rounds to something else. Now, for these purposes, I don't care whether the conductor calls up or down or tells which pair of bells to swap or says, oh, Fred and Jane, you swap. It really doesn't matter. The point is the conductor tells us that he or she wants us to change the pattern of ringing to something else. So, for example, if we're going on the way to Queen's and the bells were ringing 1, 3, 2, 5, 4, 6, then the conductor might, by calling up or down or some other way, tell bells 2 and 5 to swap. So that would change it to 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6. That would be a difference. We've changed what's going on. Probably the next stage after that is when we change what we're ringing, not just one pair at a time because the conductor tells us to, but because we are changing every single blow according to some pre-learnt pattern. And the most obvious one that would be plain hunting. I'm going to use 6 bells as an example, but it really doesn't matter how many. So there on the screen, you can see, let me try wiggling the mouse. You can see we start in rounds and then we change, once we're told to this one, 2, 1, 4, 3, 6, 5. And the one after that is 2, 1, 6, 3, 5, and so it goes on. Now, a lot of people call a sequence like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 2, 1, 3, 6, 5, a change. Technically, they're not, they're rows, and the change is the process by which we get from one to the other. Just like in call changes, the conductor might say 2 to 5 or something like that. He tells us how to change from one row to the next. Now, in this particular case, the first change, if you look at that row and the row underneath, every single pair of bells has swapped. The first 2 have swapped, 3 and 4 have swapped, 5 and 6 have swapped. A quick way of saying that is just to use the letter X, just to mean everybody swapped with everybody else. So the first change is an X, meaning every single pair of bells have swapped. That's not true of the second lot, though. Here we see that the leading bell, it happens to be bell 2, but the bell in first position has stayed where it is, and the bell at the back, which is 6th position, has stayed where it is, and the rest swap. So the next change is that bells in first and 6th position stay put and everybody else swaps. And we denote that by 1, 6, meaning that bells in first and 6th position stay put and everybody else swaps. And if we apply that change to where we were, the resulting row is 2, 4, 1, 6, 3, 5. So let's be quite clear about the distinction between a row and a change. Going on with plain hunting on 6, let's have a look, because this is the first time when we ring plain hunting on some number or other, where we do actually go through a continuous pattern of changing without being told what to do. So let's have a look at the rows and the changes. There are all the rows, and as a ringer, that sort of might think, oh yes, I've done that, that's a bit familiar. But I think to a layman, they just look at that and say, well, that's a huge mess of numbers. There's no pattern to that I can see. How on earth do you lot remember that? And the answer is that if we look at what the changes are, it's really a remarkably simple pattern. As we've already seen, we start with an X, every pair of bells swaps. Then for the next change, the bells in first and last position, 1 and 6, stay put, and the middle ones change. Then we're back to another X, and so on. Now, that's all very well. It may help us understand what plain hunting is and how it works in a sort of theoretical point of view, but to be honest, that's not really very much help while ringing. So let's consider ringing it. There are those same numbers again. Let's assume we're ringing the 4. A lot of people, when they start ringing and start doing plain hunting, learn who to follow. Probably because in rounds, if we're ringing the 4, we spend a lot of time looking at the 3 and ring after it. And therefore, when we start doing plain hunting, we again rely very much on who we follow. So I've put there in red the various bells that we follow, and maybe if you've rung that, you've actually learnt that pattern. But here's another question that I think I'll answer. That really isn't in the long run a very good idea. Why not? Well, firstly, as you progress and ring more complicated things, methods, there'd be an awful lot to learn if you've got to remember who you're following every single time. And then in due course, the conductor's going to throw in bobs and singles, and we don't know when they're going to occur. So how can we learn a pattern in advance if we don't know what the pattern's going to be? It's just not going to work. Second reason why this is a bad idea is, quite apart from knowing who to follow, we've got to manipulate our bell to be in the right position. So in these early changes here, as we move and change to this position, then this position, then this position, we're hunting down. Later on, we're hunting out. To actually physically do this, we've got to ring quicker. And as you know, there's things you've got to do to achieve that. It won't just happen naturally. You can't just think, oh, I'm going to ring after the 1. You've got to know that you're going to have to ring quicker to ring after the 1. Here, we're going to ring slower. So it's a bad idea merely to look at a bell and follow it, because are you going to have to hold up to follow that bell or ring quicker or what? So I think everyone would agree that a much better way of looking at it in terms of actually ringing it is to look at the blue line. Notice that blue lines don't have to be blue. We've got the blue line for the 1 as well, which is red, but it's still a blue line. So as we get a bit better, we rely much more on remembering our position in each row. The blue line's a good visual way, if you're a visual learner, of remembering what that is. And this also then tells us what to do. It's easy to remember, and it also tells us whether we've got to ring quicker or slower. So I think that's altogether a better way of looking at it. But as I said, what we're thinking about today is not so much the blue line, but the changes. And here I've got the same pattern, but listing the changes. As we've already seen, they alternate between X's, where all pairs of bells swap. Doesn't matter which the bells are. Here's another X down here. And again, all the pairs of bells swap. The front 2 bells happen to be the 3 and the 5 this time. And a lot of the changes are X's. The others are 1/6s. Here's one of them, a 1/6, and we can see the bell at the front. It happens to be the 4, first position, it stays put. And the bell in 6th position stays put, and everybody else's swaps. So what we've done is realize that in change ringing, we can change what we ring. So instead of having to ring rounds all the time, which will get a bit tedious, we do indeed change to ring different rows, which begs the question, how many rows actually are there? 1's pretty boring. I mean, when you ring a bell, it goes bong. You can't really change it at all. So there is 1 possibility. Let's move on. On 2 bells, you can either go 1, 2 or 2, 1, and that's all there is. There are 2 possibilities. Ringing every single possibility is called an extent. An extent on 2 is just those. We don't normally do that deliberately. I do remember in Brisbane one time, though, you know, it was one of those occasions where treble's going, she's gone, and then somebody said, stop, stop, I've got to go to the loo or something. So 1 and 2 pulled off, and all the rest were in time not to pull off. So we got 1, 2, and then of course they all rang the backstroke to stand their bells, and it happened to be 2, 1, and then we stopped. And some wit said, nice extent on 2. 3 bells, I've listed all the possibilities, and there are 6. And you can achieve that mathematically because it's 3 times 2 times 1. Why 3 times 2 times 1? Well, I think we can see why that is. If I ask any of you to pick a particular one, I might ask someone to say, suppose we're going to pick this one. Which bell do you want to go first? And you might say 1, 2, or 3. 3 possibilities. It's 3. Then I might pick someone else and say, okay, which bell do you want to go second? Well, 3 we've already used. It's ringing first. It could either be the 1 or the 2 that rings second. So there are 2 possibilities. Let's say it's the 1. Who's going to ring third? Well, we've got no choice at all there. It's got to be the 2. It's the only one left. So 3 choices here, 2 choices there, just the 1 choice there, 6. Let's carry that on and look at this pattern as a table. We've already looked at 1, 2, and 3. On 4, 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, 24 possible rows. On 5, there are 120, and it's worth at this stage, this is a decent length of time of ringing. If you want to ring an extent on 4, it'll only take you a minute or so, but on 5, 4 or 5 minutes. On 6, somewhere around half an hour. 7, this is a particularly important number, this, because it's been decided that the length of a peal, what's called a peal, is based on ringing every single combination on 7, which is 5,040 changes. So a peal is a length of ringing of 5,040, or the rules change a little bit, but effectively 5,040 changes or more, and typically on most towers it takes about 3 hours. It's a bit of an effort, 3 hours ringing, and a lot of people prefer a quarter peal, which is about 45 minutes. If we extended the table further still, 8, 40,000 would take about a day, and by the time you get up to 9, 10, 11, and 12, you're into many, many years. 8 on tower bells has actually been done once. It took a bit less than a day because it was the Loughborough Foundry bells, which are very light and can be run quickly, but an amazing feat. And I understand that when it was done, they were all expert ringers, so there was no difficulty with the method or mistakes or anything like that. It was just a matter of I suppose you'd call it medical matters. Can you actually last that long without falling over? And I believe it took them 4 goes to do it, but it has actually been done. So moving on, can we ring all these possible rows? Well, 1 and 2 are a bit boring. 3, if we plain hunt on 3, it's the familiar pattern, and you can see there are 6 things before it comes round, 6 rows, and we've already found there are 6 possible rows, so it goes through all of them. What about 4? Bit of a setback here. There's plain hunting on 4, and we can only get 8 of the rows, so we've got to invent something different. So what are we going to do about it? We'd have to make some sort of alteration, and the way it's normally done is, again, I think best sorted out by looking at the changes. So on 4, we alternate between X, all change, and 1, 4, the bell first and last stays put. But that gets us back to rounds too soon. So I suggest that the simplest alteration would be to wait till it's about to come round and then do something different. So it's going to be this change here that will do something different to stop it coming round, that one. And what nearly everybody does is we agree that at that change, we won't do a 1, 4 anymore. We'll have a bell making seconds. Now, any of you who've rung plain bob will be familiar with the idea of making seconds. This is why we do it. A bell makes seconds. So from 1, 3, 2, 4, the first and second bells stay put, and it changes to that. What's going to happen if we just carry on? Having got to this, why don't we go back to plain hunting again, and then at the next treble lead do the same? How far will that get us? Here we have those changes we've just described, X and 1, 4, until it would be going to come around, where we have a bell making seconds. And now let's do exactly the same thing again. Plain hunt until the treble leads and a bell making seconds. It's bell number 4 this time. And do that again, and oh look, it's come around. Each of these rows is 8. There are 3 of them, 24 rows, so that is an extent. But as we often find with listing things like this, the numbers are not very memorable, and the red numbers, the changes, they may help us understand what's going on, but don't really help us ring it very much. So when it actually comes to ringing it, it's much better to think of blue lines. Now, if you've rung a a plain bob, you'll be familiar with what happens here, but notice what happens. The treble, because it's always in the front when we do this funny 1-2 change, it just plain hunts the whole time. The other bells plain hunt most of the time, but when the treble's leading, they do something different. Here we see the 2 is coming back to 3rd place, but then dodging back up to 4th place before it carries on plain hunting and does another dodge here, carries on plain hunting, and the 3rd one, it's the bell that makes seconds, and it comes round. So what we've decided is if we want to extend the number of changes so that we can ring more and more rows, we'll plain hunt until the treble's leading, then we'll have a bell making seconds, bells above it to a dodge, and we'll keep on going that way. This pattern is called plain bob, however many bells we ring it in. We've looked at it on 4 bells, and it's called plain bob minimus, and it'll work just as well on 5 or any number of bells. Let's have a look at 5 bells. Here's plain hunting on 5. Just a comment there before we go on. We haven't got the pattern with 5 of X something, because on 5 bells, they can't all swap. So we start off with all the front bells swapping, but the bell at the back stays put. And then the next time it is, as before, a 1. The first bell stays where it is and the other ones swap. Then we're back to the 5th bell staying put and the other ones swap, and a 1. So we alternate in doubles, or indeed in any odd number, between 1 and 5 in this case, and sure enough it comes around after a bit. That's not very many changes at all, and as we've already decided in plain bob, we avoid coming round, we avoid the bells coming round I should say, by having a bell make seconds. So the final change isn't what it was before. We're going to change it. We're going to have the bell at the front will be the treble, so that'll stay where it is, and we're going to make seconds. So a bell makes seconds, it's bell number 3. These 2 bells do swap, and that leaves the bell at the back nowhere to go, so it just stays where it is as well. So the final change is 1, 2, 5, meaning the leading bell stays where it is, the bell in 2nd place stays where it is, and the bell in 5th place stays where it is. If you've rung a plain course of plain bob doubles, you'll be familiar with how it works. If not, here we've got all the blue lines being shown. Treble, as we expect, plain hunts the whole time. The 2 plain hunts, but at the treble lead, it actually makes a dodge. Carries on plain hunting. The 3 plain hunts till, it's the bell that makes seconds at the first lead end. It happens to arrive in this place, and as we know, this change is a 1, 2, 5. And 4 is the bell that's got to the back, and it's the bell that stays in 5th place. This change is 1, 2, 5. It stays there. This is the pattern. So plain hunting, a bell makes seconds. And is that going to give us every possible row? Unfortunately not. If you count up a plain course, it'll come to 40 rows and extents 120. So yet again, we've got to come up with something fresh, something different, something new. And this is sort of beginning to feel a bit nasty. 1, 2, and 3, we get everything by plain hunting. To get everything on 4, we had to invent this idea of making seconds at a lead end, and that worked. And on 5, even that idea doesn't work. So we're going to have to invent something new this time, and yet another new thing for 6, and another new thing for 7. That's getting a bit horrific. Well, happily, the answer is no. What we do is, we do indeed, as we've seen, have to produce some sort of extra special, funny new bit, an additional alteration. But whatever method we're ringing, we just have these alterations, and these additional alterations are actually called by the conductor during the ringing. So we've got a lot of flexibility there because the conductor will tell us when to do them. We don't know in advance. Generally speaking, for most methods, these additional alterations that we have to learn, there are just 2 of them, and they're called bobs and singles, nearly always. In fact, in plain bob doubles, which is probably the first method that you ring, we only use bobs. But in general, we have to do a bob or a single. We have to know what both those mean. So the good news is that we don't have to keep on learning more and more and more different things that we have to do as the number of bells expands. What we do is we learn a method, and then we learn what to do at lead ends, which might be the conductor not saying anything at all, and we do whatever happens at what's called a plain lead end, which we've just seen for plain bob is a bell makes seconds. But we learn a couple of extra things that we might do instead. Once we've learned those, that's all there is to learn. It turns out that with the conductor judiciously throwing in bobs and singles, we can ring a short touch. If it's 12 minutes to go before the service, we can ring a 12-minute touch. We could go on and ring a peal that takes 3 hours, and all we need to know is what the method is and what to do if the conductor makes no call at a lead end or a bob or a single, and that's it. Now, what this additional variation or alteration is, could be anything, but quite a common one. We've seen that in plain bob you make seconds at a lead end, it's a 1-2, and instead we're going to make fourths. So here we are looking at a touch of plain bob doubles. Now, if you haven't rung plain bob doubles before, don't try and understand all of it. This is just a sort of a taster, an introduction. If you have rung it, you should be familiar with what happens. So we'll pick any bell. Let's pick the 2 because it's a nice big flat blue line. In plain bob, we plain hunt. Here we are plain hunting, but as we've already said, at a lead end, a bell makes seconds, and the bells here swap, and the bell at the back stays where it is. It's 1-2-5, we make seconds. So here is a plain lead end, and we've done this dodge, and then we go back to what the method is, we plain hunt. Here, I've shown a bob. Let's come back and look and see what happens to that in a minute. Let's pick another bell. Let's look at the 5. Starting the method, we plain hunt until the lead end, where we do something funny. It's a dodge. And here we're going to do something different. Look at the 4. It's plain hunted. At the lead end, 1-2-5 is the change. It's the bell that stays in 5th place. So it just stays where it is there, and it does 4 blows. If you've rung this method, you'll know that's called making long fifths. And what happens at the lead end is a bell makes seconds, 2 bells dodge with each other, and the bell at the back stays there for 4 blows, because the funny thing at the lead end is don't carry on plain hunting, but stay where you are. Then don't try and learn this if you haven't rung it. Basically, the point I'm making is just that when you get to a bob, if the conductor calls a bob, you learn to do something different. Now, if you have actually rung this, or at the stage of almost ringing it, you might be interested to just check here what the funny thing is. As I said, the funny thing you do at a bob is make fourths. You don't carry on plain hunting, you don't make seconds, but a bell makes fourths. Let's see what effect this has. Here's this bell, happens to be number 4. It's coming up, and at the lead end with a bob called, it makes fourths, and then carries on plain hunting. Because it's 1-4-5, the bell leading stays where it is. Well, it's the treble, we expected that. The bell at the back stays where it is, which is actually what the bell at the back did here. The bell at the back does exactly what it would have done at a plain lead end anyway. It does 4 blows in 5th place, and it's these bells that do something a bit different. Now, I don't want to go on to discuss that in great detail. If you've already rung that, that will make sense. If not, it's just a sort of an introduction to what is going to happen. The point I do want to make is that we learn something else to do at a bob, and it happens to be make fourths at this method, much the same way as we learnt that you make seconds at a plain lead end. So everybody will have to learn that, but they will have learnt what to do. But the point is, unlike what we've discussed before, they don't know when the conductor is going to call a bob. So we have enormous flexibility because the conductor will call the bob when he or she chooses to do it. But the point I do want to make is that that's it. There's nothing more to it. We can carry on ringing to ring a whole peal, or for half an hour, or for 10 minutes, whatever you like, depending on what the conductor calls. All we have to do is know what the method is, plus learning what to do with bobs and singles. Now that's pretty much what I want to say. And that might be a bit of an overstatement, but really that is all there is to ringing. you learn to plain hunt, you learn bell control, you learn to plain hunt, you learn a method. The one we've been looking at today is called plain bob. That's not enough to generate every possible row. So as well as having a method, you have to learn some variations on it, what to do at a bob or a single. And once you've done that, you can ring pretty much anything. I will admit that when we talk about learning a method, methods vary in their difficulty. The method we've been looking at plain bob is essentially plain hunting most of the time. And so there isn't too much new to learn. As you get more advanced, you'll learn other methods. There's one called Cambridge Surprise, and it's probably the first of the really quite difficult methods. And you'll see that the blue line, the 2, instead of plain hunting, does all this weird stuff. And you might, well, how on earth do I learn that? And that's a very good question. And that's certainly not one I'm going to answer today. But yes, there can be greater or lesser complexity in learning what the method is. But you learn a method, which can be quite difficult. But then you learn what happens at a bob and a single. And that allows you to ring for as long as you like, to ring an extent, to ring a peal. And that's all there is. So let's just go back and think what we've had a look at today. I think I'll turn the screen off so I can actually see people again. What do we do in the style of ringing that we do? I was going to say in this country, I should say in UK, sorry. The English style of ringing is called full circle ringing, because unlike most places in the world, we ring the bell through 360 degrees, though I do like the alternative explanation from Stella. That was very good. Why do we do that? Well, it allows us to control when the bell sounds to some extent, and that allows us, unlike continental style ringing, to ring rounds, because we can make sure that it is rhythmical, because if we're a bit too soon or a bit too late, we can actually vary that, as you all learned to do. Oh, excuse me. Next, okay, we can ring rounds, but wouldn't it be nice to ring something a bit different? So we want to change what we're ringing. And the first and simplest way to change what we're ringing is for the conductor to call out. There are various ways of doing it, but effectively they tell 2 people to swap. That's a change. And we learned that if you're going to use the words technically, something like rounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or queens, 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6, are rows. People often call them changes, and I'm not complaining about that, but when we're having a discussion like we've had today, we use the word change, as in change ringing, to mean what change happens to get from one row to the next. And it might be the 2 and the 3 swap, or the 5 and the 6 swap, or something like that. And so we change from one row to the next. Moving on from call changes, we want to then go on to some sort of continuous pattern of changing between every row. And the best way to do that is by plain hunting. And we looked how if you just look at the numbers of plain hunting, if you just write out this great screed of numbers, that's goodness me, what's going on there? If you look at the changes, they are remarkably straightforward. We do an X, everybody changes, and then a 1, 6 if we're ringing on 6. X, 1, 6, X, 1, 6. And that suddenly thinks, oh, that makes more sense. I can now see how it's constructed. That's much easier to understand, but it doesn't actually help us ring it that much. When it comes to ringing, there are a whole lot of ways of remembering what to do, and I strongly recommend that the blue line that we looked at is the best way. It shows you what position you're ringing in, it allows you to remember it in a fairly straightforward way, and it also helps you work out what you physically got to do, because to hunt down to the front and then back out again, you've got to ring slower or quicker, and that helps you. If you just remember who to follow, that's not so obvious. So we can ring different rows, and that begs the question, how many rows are there? And we saw, for example, that an extent on 4 is 24, an extent on 7 is 5040. How can we carry on ringing to get through every possible row that there is? We saw that plain hunting does the trick on 1, 2, and 3, but for 4, we have to introduce something different. Otherwise, we just go around in circles. We get back to rounds too soon. And what we do is make seconds when the treble's leading. That gives us something a bit different. And if we carry on with that pattern, sure enough, it does go through every single change. On 5, though, it doesn't. And that's where what fortunately turns out to be the final additional complication to a method comes in. We introduce these things that we don't know in advance where they're going to occur. The conductor calls them. They're called bobs and singles. So if we want to really master a method and ring it for as long as is necessary to go through a whole extent or ring for a set period, then we have to learn the method. And we have to learn that at lead ends, there are three things that could happen. The conductor could say nothing at all. That's a plain lead end, or could call a bob, or a single. And once we've learned that, we're completely happy with the method, and we've got the flexibility to ring for as little or as long as we like. And really, that is the essence of ringing. There is no more complications to learn. Certainly, yes, some methods are much more complicated and take a lot of learning, but if we start with plain bob, that's the pattern, that's how it works. We learn bobs and singles, or if we're ringing on 5 bells, just bobs are enough, and that's it. Okay, I think it's about time I shut up, and if there are any questions anyone wants to ask, or any comments or anything, please proceed.
Right. Well, thanks very much, David. I really enjoyed that. I mean, as in our conversation before we started, I did admit to you that I'm usually only about 2 pages ahead of everybody else in the book. And I do think that my theory knowledge is sadly lacking in many instances. There's been one question in the chat box, which is from Alex, which is, he asked, is the term bob and single interchangeable? Now, we've had some answers from people. So Tony said no, generally a bob is 1/4 and a single is 1 2 3 4. Janet said no, they have different place notations. And Phil said no, a bob affects 3 bells and a single just 2. It's not always possible to ring extents using only bobs. Singles are required as well. So Alex, does that answer your question? But one of the example that David gave was of for plain bob doubles, and he did say beforehand that singles are not normally rung in plain bob doubles. I mean, I think that the reason for that is that if you rang, as Tony said, the place notation is 1 2 3 4, and you've got a bell staying in the same place in 5th place, then actually you end up ringing the same row twice. There isn't a change because you'll have rung 1 2 3 4 and 5, and then the next row will be 1 2 3 4 5. So that makes it sort of an illegal bell ringing move, really, or non-move. So I don't know.
I can add to that. Yeah, clearly the consensus is that no was the answer to the question. It turns out that, as Claire's just said, if you merely have one call, whatever it is, whatever the method, that isn't always, and indeed most often, it isn't enough to get you through every change. It turns out, for example, that if you ring plain bob minor and you merely do bobs, you can only actually achieve half the changes. Happily, it then turns out that for nearly all methods, 2 calls are enough. I suspect that actually 2 calls can be guaranteed always to be enough to allow you to get through every possible row. But certainly some methods, people, I mean, bell ringers are weird people. If once they've got something sorted, they'll always invent something to make it more complicated. So some methods have peculiar calls that people have put in just to be different for everybody else, and they're called extremes, or they call, they might call anything. But 2 different calls are enough to guarantee that you can get every single possible combination. Generally speaking, as Claire mentioned, if you see how many bells are affected by the call, usually in a bob it'll be 3 bells that are affected, and usually in a single it will be 2 bells. That's not universally true, but if you've invented a call and you think, well, should I call this bob or single, or shall I call it Fatima or something, you'll probably be most popular if you call bob or single, because that's what most people expect. And usually you'd see how many bells are affected, and you usually try not to affect too many. And if it's 3 bells, you'd call it a bob. If it's 2 bells, you'd call it a single. Can I also make a plug for my home country here? In Australia, we very strongly encourage people calling a bob to say bob, or the alternative call is single, because of course with all the noise going on in the tower, that's nice and clear. If I may be rude, some UK conductors have a habit of going bow, or woof woof if it's a single. That leads to all sorts of complications. I got myself into big trouble once. I was ringing somewhere, a very nice, very advanced standard of ringing, and they were ringing Stedman doubles, which happens rather like we said in Plain Bob doubles, you only need one call. In Stedman, it happens to be a single. Anyway, the tower captain wasn't there and someone else was calling it. We were ringing along quite happily, and he went, "Rah!" I thought, what was that? So I asked, was that a bob? What I meant was that actually a call or was it a sneeze? I'm really not sure, but he took enormous offence because he thought I was being very snooty and saying, don't you know it's meant to be a single? You should have said woof woof, not woof. Which wasn't what I meant at all. So I believe in clarity of calls, but bobs and singles, they're different, and because usually there is a need for two different calls.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm glad that I read all those things out that everybody said, because David now thinks that I knew the answers to those questions. So, has anybody got any other questions for?
Yeah, actually, David, can I just mention your place notation for the bob minimus and the bob doubles was absolutely fine. Is it probably just worth mentioning though that with the bob doubles, whilst you showed the place being made as in 1515, there were no actual crosses, and that, I mean, yeah, for those of us in the know, it's a given that those crosses are there. But I've found when I've been chatting to some of the school students who are now have been quite keen to go onto various method websites, they actually don't all, some do and some don't put those crosses in. So it's just worth clarifying that.
Oh, the ones I've seen always do put the X's in if it's an all change. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily use an
if it's an all change. If it's an all change, they do. It's more a sort of a confusion thing. So you know, yes, if a doubles method can just be a row of numbers, you know, yes, it's a given that if you know the rest of the changes are still crosses.
Oh yeah,
that's the bit I was just trying to get at.
Yeah. The crucial thing about that number is if a change is listed as, I mean, suppose you're ringing on 20 bells, and the change is, you know, 1, 7, 13 or something. What that means is that those bells stay put, and the bells not mentioned all change with each other. So it's everybody swaps one way or the other except for these named ones, and everybody else does swap with each other.
So we've got a question come from Steve Askew.
Steve.
Hi, David. Yeah, mainly for the benefit of people maybe haven't actually rung bobs and singles in practice. How much notice would you expect a conductor to give that there is a bob or a single at the end of a lead? Particularly between even bell methods and odd bell methods.
There is a very strong convention that is nearly always adhered to, but not always. Some conductors do call a bit earlier or a bit later, but the generally agreed convention is that you always give people 2 blows, might be 1 hand stroke, 1 backstroke, or 1 backstroke, 1 hand stroke, notice of any alteration to the pattern. So if you're playing hunting and you're expecting to go, you know, lead, 2, 3, 4 is the lead end, I'm expecting to dodge back to 3. If a bob's called, in this method you make fourths. So I'm going to go, I'm talking about my positions here. I'm going to go 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3. Oh no, it isn't 3, it's 4. Now I've got to be given plenty of notice for that. 2 blows notice means it's going to be lead, 2. Bob, because I still ring in 3, that's the first blow's notice. I still ring in 4, but the next blow is 4, not 3. So that's the change. That's the difference. And the convention is you tend to call between rows. So you wait till a row's finished, then you make the call, and nothing happens the next row, nothing happens the row after that, but the one after that is when you do something different. Even that's actually true for when you say stand. You may have found it a little bit odd. Sorry, not stand, that's all. If you're ringing something and it comes round, normally you'd carry on. If the conductor wants you to stop, the conductor will say stand. And again, to follow that convention, you would say stand and the treble would lead, and it might be 1, 3, 2, 5, 4, 6, still the same. The next row is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, where it comes round, and the next blow is where, instead of continuing, you actually stay in rounds. So even for saying stand, you should, and most people do, give 2 blows notice of what you're of doing something different. And there's something different when you, not stand, there's something different when you finish ringing is that you stay in rounds. So the rounds themselves isn't anything different, but the fact that you stay there and don't carry on moving is different. So yeah, 2 blows notice.
Thank you very much, David.
So we've also got a question. Stella's got her hand raised here. So Stella.
Thank you. Thanks, David. Just a personal thank you to you, really, without you probably realising. 2 years ago, I made the mistake of saying to Simon, oh, I'm going to Australia next week. And not having at that stage been brave enough to tower grab, he put me in touch with you, and thereby you put me in touch with others. And I actually, although you weren't at Adelaide at the time, I came and Matthew Ball introduced me.
Yes.
And I tried to ring at Adelaide Town Hall. They were quite tricky, but I managed it.
Yes,
And Melbourne, St Patrick's and St Paul's. So a big thank you to you for putting me in touch with everybody at that time, and it's lovely to see you today.
Oh, I could see you. Sorry I missed you when you arrived before.
Yeah.
Can I just make a general publicity point for everyone to consider in terms of their own guilds and associations? We do have the advantage in Australia of being I was going to say comparatively small place. We're not, we're actually enormous. But we have about 70 towers. We're actually still building them. We build about 2 new ones each year. But it's a small enough number that one website can hold absolutely everything. So go onto the ANZ website, look at towers, and you can immediately see where they are, what's near you, what's ringing on a Monday. And then when you look at the particular tower, a map, how to get there, the email of the person to contact, the phone number, everything like that. And I have to say, when I'm ringing in UK, I do find the comparative task really quite difficult. I've no idea what the various guilds are. You know, you ring somewhere, I'm in, I don't know, I'm in Shropshire, and is that Bath and Wells? No, it's part of, you know, no idea. And you can have 2 towers 6 inches apart, and one's on one website, one's another, and it really is very confusing. And any chance any of you get to prod the powers that be to say, can we sort of rationalise this a bit? Please do.
You can do your own prodding here. I think there's so many you can prod down at the bottom of my screen.
To say the powers that be are on the call.
Yes.
And Shropshire,
I think the St Martin's Guild one is I was looking at the website earlier today, but it's definitely one of the better organised and clearer ones. So that's good.
Good, well said, David. Yeah. Well, and
also, may I say to everybody here, I joined it because I totally approved of the concept that Simon started, that a guild shouldn't be those who live within this geographical boundary that is determined by ecclesiastical boundaries that were drawn up 8,000 years ago. It just said, well, we're a group of people and we're not restricted by geography, and those who wish to join should. And I approved of that so much. I believe in putting your money where your mouth is, so that's why I'm a member.
Yeah, so and I think obviously in this period of lockdown, that has become even more apparent. I mean, as I said earlier, we've had a visitor from Cornwall today, and we've had people from York, and we've had people from Cumbria joining us for some of our sessions. So it's just really nice to be able to do that, and that people are appreciating it. So has anybody got any more?
Can I prod you to ask a question, please, Claire?
Yeah.
Would you like to ask me, have I done any service ringing since lockdown?
Are you going to make us all jealous and say that you have?
I have, and it's in England. Because a couple of towers that I have physically rung at there, the church has said they heard about Ringing Room, and that, you know, for practice and doing virtual ringing, it existed. And the vicar in 2 cases said, oh, Well, the congregation, we're having virtual services. They'd really like to know that, could you do virtual service ringing for us? We won't broadcast it, but we'll tell them it's happening, and they'll be really interested. So at least 2 churches do virtual service ringing, and I've rung on them, which before the lockdown I'd have needed a very, very long rope to do.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the Wilbys have rung for services in their garage. They've got a little mini ring, and between the 3 of them, they've managed to ring 5 for Sunday service as well. But I certainly haven't been near a church or a bell rope for many weeks now. So, does anybody have any further questions from David, or shall I open the session up for general chat? I shouldn't really ask questions to people who are muted, really, should I? So
replies.
Yes, I think if people can, if there are no further questions, then we'll just open up the session to chat to people. And once again, thank you very much, David. That was I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Could I ask you to provide feedback? It's always useful, and I do point out that feedback that says that's the best thing, or indeed the worst thing since sliced bread, is not very helpful. It's the this was very good, but I got a bit lost there, or this didn't work very well. That's always the most useful sort of feedback. I do a lot of this sort of stuff, but I've never done one to a large group virtually before.
Right. Well, I think
large live groups.
If people do have some feedback, if they'd like to email the Guild email address, it's the smg@cbr@gmail.com, we'll pass on the feedback to David. So.
What is that thing on the wall behind you, David?
A wall? Where I can't see it.
Looks like a skateboard without wheels.
The sort of thing that looks like
the thing up there.
Yeah.
That
thing.
That
is, as I said, I was a missionary in Papua New Guinea for about 6 weeks a year for about 10 years. And one of the industries they had, this is an area where there were no power supply, nothing really. Not much food for one thing. But one of the local industries they did have was wood carving. And so I tried to commission a wood carving each year. That was a Brisbane bell one. You can probably see the cross at the top. The Brisbane Cathedral's changed a bit since then, and the bell symbol. And it probably says it's inside out for me, but it says something relevant.
No, it says right around.
Yeah, but not for me. It's inside out for me. And up on that side is my software company, is Grey Gum Software, and that's its logo hiding behind a printer. And they did that too. And we, when we would do conferences, we'd cart that round, and always people would wonder where it came from, what it did.
Okay.
Good day, David. It's Alan. Can you hear me?
Can't see you yet.
I'm on.
Yes, got you. Yes. Sorry, I was looking at the.
Very good day to you. Thank you very much indeed for making that point about when conductors put calls in to make them loud and clear. I think that was a very good point. And can I ask you, what district of Brisbane are you in?
Ashgrove.
All right. Do you know Morningside?
Yes.
My cousin's son lives in Morningside. So when we communicate, I very often think of all people in Australia. But when you said you were from Brisbane, I had to ask where you're from. How far is it away, by the way?
We're due west of the city centre. Quick geography lesson for everybody else. Brisbane's, I don't know what the population is. It's probably a couple of million, something like that. It extends enormously to the north and to the south for probably about 100 kilometres in each direction because it's along the coast. But westwards, it only goes about 8 kilometres. So we're about halfway out from the centre because the suburb beyond us, Ashgrove, is called The Gap because it's a gap between two very hilly bits. And beyond that, there's nothing. That's all pristine forest. And then you get straight out to nothing. So we've got a lovely combination of being very central and in what's otherwise a very large city. I should also mention, I don't know if any of you watched in Australia, we've been watching a series called The Cathedrals of England on BBC, I think. It probably was, it must have been made a year or two ago, and I'm sure it's aired in the UK as well. Yeah. But Brisbane Cathedral was started in about 1890 and finished not that long ago, about 2009. So it took about 1,000 years to build, 100 years to build, which is about typical. And it's the same architect as Truro, I believe, but almost certainly it's the last. I mean, it's not quite on the scale of the huge English ones, but it's a beautiful building. Almost certainly it's the last Gothic cathedral ever to be built.
Thank you very much, David. Anyway, it's very, very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay, right. So what time is it now? So we're just at 11 o'clock. So that's the usual time that we would be finishing. So yeah, once again, a really big thank you to David. David has actually got some other presentation, well, another presentation that he would be prepared to give to. It would be a Saturday morning because Wednesday evenings are just not convenient for people in Australia, I think. So we might be seeing you, David, again in a couple of weeks' time, which would be great. Thank you, David.
Good. I hope I'll see you in the flesh in the not unduly distant future.
Hopefully,
Maybe
yeah.
a year or so away, I think. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
David, can I just ask one Australian question?
Who's this? Sounds like, is that Simon?
Yeah. Of all the rings of bells in Australia, how many of the rings of bells have been instigated but not by bell ringers? So how many times has maybe a clergyman thought, I need a ring of bells for change ringing, rather than it being driven by, could we come and put a ring of bells in here?
In recent history, not at all. I'm not a historian, so I don't go back that far. I know we were looking back at the 50th anniversary of ANZAB. We were looking back, not to when it started, but looking back sort of a few decades, and it was 25 looking back, and it's gone up to 50 at that anniversary, which was maybe 10 years ago, and now it's up to 70. Certainly the change from 50 up to 70 is almost entirely Ron Shepherd. In fact, he goes around and tells people they want bells. But having said that, the funding, ANZAB helps a lot with grants and getting things going and getting it off the ground, but the funding ultimately has to come from the local community. And generally speaking, that hasn't proved a problem.
No.
Whether that was true of the earlier runs, I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah.
There is a rather nice story of one of the early ones in a rather posh area of Sydney, sort of the equivalent of Mayfair, and they decided they wanted a ring of bells. This is going back quite a long time, and there's enormous planning problems with an existing church. You've got to test it; it's structurally okay, and you've got to source the bells, and there's a lot of stuff to be done. And at one morning service, at about sort of 10 o'clock service, at the end of the service, about 11:30, the minister said, "Oh, well, I've got news on the bells front. You'll be pleased to know we've been talking about this a long time. We've decided to go Kelly for you if we could. We've now got planning permission. We've got the structural survey. We've sourced the bells. Everything's ready to go. So I've pressed the button, and it's all going to happen. And all we want is the money." And in modern terms, it was about $1 million, say £500,000 or so. So as of now, this is 11:15 in the morning. We're fundraising. We need $1 million, and they got it by noon.
What's the health of the church like in Australia?
Similar to UK, we have many more varieties of church. I'm thinking both in terms of ecclesiastical stuff generally and bell ringing. Our ringing towers are very different from UK in that more than half are Anglican, which is equivalent to Church of England here. But there are a lot of Catholic ones, quite a few other denominations, Uniting Church, which is our sort of Methodists, Baptists, and something else that all combined, and also quite a few town halls and that sort of thing. Stella was mentioning Adelaide Town Hall, Ballarat Town Hall is another one. So it's very different in that respect. Because not very many churches do have bells, probably say we might have 40 Anglican churches with bells. Although the Anglican church is in decline, it's not that much in decline that we have so many that an awful lot of them are falling silent or not having services anymore. They're mostly in good health. To my knowledge, there's only one church that the Church of England got rid of. It's one of the Tasmanian ones in Hobart, and it's sadly, from our point of view, it was one of the two churches there that has bells, And in the end, they sold it to the Greek Orthodox Church. And we were sort of very tentative about what would happen. And they said, oh, bells? Oh, no, we don't usually have bells. But yeah, jolly good idea. That'll be great. Yes, just carry on ringing them. And about 2 or 3 months into the whole process, they turned up for their normal practice and rang. And on the way out, they found there was a service in progress. They were absolutely horrified. And they went down to talk to I'm not sure if vicar's the right term, but after the service, they talked to the guy in charge and said, oh, we're so sorry. If we didn't realise, we must liaise a bit better. We didn't realise there was a service on. We're very sorry to have interrupted you, and we really didn't mean to, and apologies. And their action was, why on earth not ring during a service? I mean, the more noise, the better. Yeah, no, just carry on, keep on doing it. They were great.
Interesting.
Okay then. So I think we'll end the meeting now, and hopefully we'll see David again in the near future. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I hope I can actually attend as an attendee for a few. But thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.